I hope it allows people to be more authentic, to be more creative. Let's offload some of the work so we can do more creative ventures.
Milt, coffee, tea, or something else? What fuels your mornings?
Mostly coffee. And
Yeah.
I tend to, I try to spice it up a little bit with some hot cocoa. And so it's
Oh,
hot
nice.
cocoa and coffee. So I make this mocha, this homemade mocha, I guess you could say.
Nice. Nice. Now I kind of want that. When you were a kid, what did you think you'd grow up to be?
That's a good question. I bounce around with what I felt like I knew I was going to be doing something in computers. Right, I knew I was
Yeah.
going to be doing something in computers or electronics. Whether I was a programmer or some kind of hardware builder. That was my path as a kid,
Nice. Nice. So
or a
sounds.
Jedi. One of the other.
Yeah, of course. I want it to be Superman, but whatever.
Right.
What's one technology that you can't live without?
Um, you know, Probably communications, right? I've batted this back and forth. Is like what couldn't I live without? Is probably communications. Some type of communication device, and it doesn't need to be a phone. It doesn't need to be visual. Just some way to communicate out, right?
Yeah.
That's probably what I couldn't live without. Or maybe not technical, but my bike, right? Like I really
Mm,
like from an early age, and kind of going back to your previous question, I always thought I would do something in biking, like BMX or something like that, right? And so
really?
not super high tech, but biking technology, some kind of
Do you
bicycle.
do long distance biking? Because you're in Atlanta, right? I've
Yeah,
never been. I need to get out there, so invite me
yeah,
soon. But from what I hear, everything's kind of spread out, right?
it is. Yeah, and one of the latest cool developments in Atlanta is called the Beltline, and it's this big path that goes around the city and connects several other paths in Atlanta. So there's a pretty good
Nice.
cycling community here, and you can ride from Atlanta to Alabama on a
Really?
rail to trails path. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool. Very cool. All right, last one. If you can fast forward 10 years and see one impact that your work's made on the world, what would you want that to be?
I hope it makes allows people to be more authentic, right? To be more creative and dig into some of the things that they would, rather be doing than the grueling jobs, right? And so, maybe people want to do grueling jobs at some point, but I think there's always the artistic piece, right, where people want to go and enjoy nature, and for me, I'm an amateur astrophotographer, so I love taking pictures of the night sky. So, I haven't been able to do that, in the last few months. So I kind of think of it
Yeah,
through that lens. Like, I want to be able to go do that. Let's offload some of the work so we can do more creative ventures.
I love that. Okay, already I've got get out to Atlanta, get back on my bike, and I finally set up this telescope that I've got
Yeah.
sitting over here. All right, cool. Just from the intro. All
Yeah.
right, welcome to Machine Minds, everyone. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Milt Walker, Director of Business Development at NexCobot. Thanks for being on the show today, Milt.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Let's jump into it. So, I was saying this offline, very excited and happy to have one of my industry buddies on the show. But we've known each other for a while, just from the conference circuit and stuff like that, had multiple conversations. But I'd love for you to share more about your early career before we jump into everything else, just so the audience knows who they're listening to and how you first got into robotics and automation.
Sure. Yeah. So I started my career pretty early after high school. I joined this company. It was a local computer store, right? And actually, this was in high school. I joined a local computer store as a tech, and so I got to go to doctors' offices and local companies and help build their computer systems. And back then, this was XTs and 286 systems, and you know, 386. This is like the early days of computing, right? And that was my sort of entry into the industry that I look at today as the computer and robotics and AI space, as technology industry. But that was my first venture into that. And that, you know, I had always been about electronics and computers and from a pretty early age. But that was my first real job. And so, you know, later, as I tried to figure out what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and went to school, I remember um, having a conversation with a guy who talked a lot about, you know, what is sort of the next step, like what should you be thinking as a youngster about computers and like doing something in that space, and he sort of steered me, or at least he kind of counseled me towards this school in Rochester that had this program of it was computer engineering technology, and his big deal was like, you want to get in there and start doing stuff, right? You don't want to be sitting, you know, writing out theorems and kind of all this other stuff, right? You want to understand the theory, but you want to understand the application of a lot of things. So I ended up
Yeah.
enrolling in at RIT and got a computer engineering technology bachelor's. And that was really the start of the education side. In that space and in that sort of time frame, I was really interested in robotics, and building something that could move and, you know, had controls and all that stuff. I was fascinated by it. You know, it was probably due to several early toys that I had. And we can talk about that.
Yeah.
That's maybe a rabbit hole, but that's sort of the start. That's the genesis.
Love that. Yeah, I was curious where that came from because obviously early on it's got to be like toys or movies
Yeah,
or a family
mix.
member or something, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah, very
and mine
cool.
was a mix. Like I ended up, I think, you know, you're. I had a lot of aunts and cousins and where I'm from, and I remember an aunt gave me this book. She was like, "Oh yeah, I know you like robots," and she gave me this robotics book. And this robotics book, it's I actually have a copy. I lost her copy. Don't tell anyone. I lost her copy, and then I ended up buying several copies as I found them, you know, in different
Nice.
places. But it was this sort of early robotics book, and it talked about robotics from sort of the technology perspective and the cultural impact and art perspective, and it was just kind of a broad, interesting, you know, maybe a coffee table book.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You have to share the title with me so I
Yeah,
can go and find
yeah.
that as well. Um, were there any pivotal moments or roles that shaped your path through the business development leadership way that you've gone?
Yeah, you know, I that first computer store job that I had, the boss was a young lady who was like, she was very focused, very driven, and she was young. Like she started this computer store and was servicing all of the different computer related businesses, and it was like you know, I'm from a small town, and I thought that was really interesting of running a business that you sort of run the industry in the small town and the areas around it. Like we were the only computer store in our city, you know. And so I really, you know, I think that really impacted me. Like, how can you know, how do you run a business, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
create, you know, where do you get the partnerships, and how do you go about, you know, all of these things that make a successful business? So that's always been in sort of the back of my head. Even though I was like, I want to build robots or I want to build computers, there was always this idea of an entrepreneurship. And my dad is an entrepreneur and a business owner, um, and so I think that all of those things kind of came together and sort of directed me on this path of, you know, being an engineer and being a field applications engineer and, you know, salesperson, and then, you know, getting an MBA, and then, you know, doing business development. And so I
Very
think that
cool.
the journey has really been about, you know, understanding what you want to do, understanding what I want to do, doing some of that, and then also kind of looking at it from a partnerships. What are other people doing, and how do you bring those other people in that are doing similar things or want to do similar things to you and create partnerships to then go and do those things.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think that that's reflective about the role that you play, right? Because not only in your BD path and like being employed by these companies, but you're very active in the ecosystem. I know that you do a lot in the Atlanta space as well for tech and robotics. So I guess that's reflected. We can go down that path. I
Yeah,
know. Let's go down that rabbit hole. Because can you share more about that? Because it's
sure.
not just BD that you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so a couple of years ago, while just after the pandemic and sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was working at a company by the name of SICK, and SICK is a big vendor of lidar systems and barcode scanners and whatnot, and kind of thinking what my growth path was, and I knew it was in the robotic space or getting back into the robotic space. I ended up at Intel Corporation, and back at Intel, I spent many years at Intel beforehand, before the pandemic, or before I left in 2016. Ended up going back in 2022, and it was a robotics specific role. So I was looking at, okay, how do I, from Atlanta, how do I go build and help drive technology, Intel technology, into the robotics ecosystem, and what does that ultimately mean? And so there was this, I think, sort of bubbling energy around robotics and automation here in Georgia with, all the manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, EVs, and things of that nature that are happening here, and a lot of what's happening around warehouse automation, right, with local companies. And I was trying to pull all that together without spending a whole bunch of money. I didn't have a super huge marketing budget, so without spending a bunch of travel and entertainment money, how could I do that? And so I ended up attending this event in South Carolina, which was easy to get to, quick drive up to Greenville. And I went to this event. It was a day-long event, symposium on robotics. Right, brought together a bunch of ecosystem players up there, and I was mesmerized. I was like, we've got to do this here in Atlanta, right? What they did in Greenville. And so I came back and spoke with a lot of several colleagues here that were sort of all on the same page. We were all kind of gravitating around robotics and kind of helping grow robotics and automation businesses here. And we were like, oh, we've got to do this event here, and that turned into the RoboGeorgia, the nonprofit RoboGeorgia organization, and the we had our third year event this past August, right? So it's been
Yeah.
3 years since that initial event drove this creation of RoboGeorgia that brought together several other partners. It wasn't just me, but we were all sort of on the same page, and forming that and driving events and kind of building the ecosystem here in Georgia or in Atlanta.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, I love that. And then now, more recently, you joined NexCobot as you're their first US employee. Is that right?
Yeah. I think technically there's the basis of an organization. So Nexcom, our parent company, has a base on the West Coast, and
Okay.
so Nexcom, focuses on IoT and building systems and industrial embedded systems in a bunch of different segments. NexCobot takes that and focuses it really in the robotics space, right? So we build components for robot builders and machine builders. So that's functional safety, AI, machine control, and real time control. And there's some software pieces along with that. But we make those components that allow a robotics company to go and innovate and not have to, start from the ground level.
Love that. So buy instead of build kind of mentality, supporting that avenue.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
And yeah,
I would just say one thing to add to that is, a lot of what I found, and we may get into this, but what I found is that a lot of robotics companies look at themselves as software companies. There's a few that sort of do hardware, and they do hardware because they have to do hardware in many cases, but they look at themselves as they build this software layer, this autonomy stack, or this AI layer that allows their robot to go and do work, right? And so
yeah,
um, and I sort of separate what we do from, as a component provider, as a partner in that, when a robotics company is building a robot, I look at us as a potential partner.
I like that. Yeah, yeah. It's true as well. I think probably what the last sort of 8 years, 5 years, people from an investment standpoint at least have been pushed to be more, even if you're not fully, but like, hey, position yourself as a software
Yeah.
company because of how you price it, how
Right.
you hire, overhead, all of that stuff. But the reality is you're still going to be building, even if it's a small part of it, or your packaging or whatever it is. But it's a conversation I have with founders all the time, right?
Yeah.
Buy versus build. Who are the right providers to use? And then in this way of positioning, having the right partner is
Yeah.
going to be crucial. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So coming in, what sort of kind of problems have you been tasked with solving, or initiatives have you been tasked with leading at
Yeah.
NexCobot?
Yeah. I mean, that's great. I mean, as someone who's helping grow the footprint here in the U.S., my I think the big problem that I'm looking to solve, or working on solving, is the partnership. Right? Is creating the right partnerships, and you just mentioned it, is like a key thing about growing a business is your partners. Right? There's
Mm.
the saying of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. Right? And
Yeah,
so I think the whole idea is really to go far, find the right others, and build the right partnerships, to help scale the business. So that's been my challenge, is organizing that. Like, how do you create a partnership program that brings in the right people, that has the right value, that has the right things, that allows the partnership to grow and be productive, right? So that's been
yeah.
the big thing that I'm trying to solve.
Interesting. Well, what markets do you see as the most fertile ground for your guys' offerings? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. As far as robotics goes, I think the key spaces for me are what's driving the robotics business. Like, look at the macro factors that are driving robotics and automation, and some of that is, competitive, right? Efficiency, right? Manufacturers want to be able to create products in an efficient way, with less downtime, less excursions, and less quality issues and things of that nature. So that's driving a lot of robotics. And also the workforce challenge in many areas is driving robotics as well, like not being able to get the right, enough people to do the job, right? And there's a lot of, I was just talking to a manufacturer the other day, about the change in demographics that's happening in a lot of some of these smaller manufacturers, small to medium manufacturers, where you've got an aging workforce that's exiting the workforce, and you don't have many younger players that are coming into the workforce to do those specific jobs, right? And so it creates this space of, okay, are we gonna, as a manufacturer, do we shut down this place and consolidate everything to the higher efficiency manufacturing, and move it from one city to the other? And what does that do to change our supply chain, and like there's a bunch of things that have to change in order for that to happen?
right.
Or do we look at automating some of these roles, where we can do more with less of a workforce, or we can right size the workforce, and still do the work, and not have to move the business to another country, or near
Interesting.
shoring, or things of that nature? So those are big drivers of what I'm seeing in those spaces, and specifically segments around manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution centers. And yeah, I think those are the big places where I see robotics in manufacturing, and subsequently, that's where I see our partnerships with folks that are focused on that space.
Yeah. That's it. I hadn't actually ever thought about that, because you hear about a lot of companies moving, like, hey, we're going to move our operations from California to Texas or to Georgia because of space and cost
Yeah,
and, overhead and all of that stuff. But that's a big undertaking. Like,
yeah,
even if you look at who was it? Was it Toyota or something? I can't remember. Like moving all of their finance department to take like the amount of money these companies spent on relocation,
Yeah.
on exit packages, on all of that stuff, just from like a hiring people standpoint,
Yeah.
let alone the whole new building
Right.
and everything else. Like if you can do it in a manufacturing or logistics setting and just automate, do more with less, stay with your original footprint. I think, yeah, that's a great lead for what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does your day-to-day of business development look like, bridging between Taiwan, US markets and collaborating maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I either Taiwan is 12 hours off for me,
Yeah.
right? So I'm either up early meeting with my colleagues over there, or up late meeting with my colleagues over there when it's early. So typically around 8ish, 8:30 is the time that works on both ends. Sometimes it's a little bit later um, on their end, but um, it's interesting. It's the day to day is certainly when it comes to meetings. That's sort of the meeting schedule. Hopefully, one of the biggest challenges is trying to organize multiple time zone meetings. Right, when you've got like whether it's someone in India, Taiwan,
Yeah.
California, in on the East Coast, it's so difficult to manage those types of meetings. But I think that the day to day, if it's not meetings, it's me working with partners, making connections. Like you mentioned, I'm always out in the ecosystem, talking with, whether it's, potential customers, partners, other folks in the ecosystems, funders, startup folks, and making connections. I look at my job is certainly about as a business development guy, I sort of look at that different than sales, even though I'm doing business development and building a sales footprint.
Mhm.
Business development to me is more about building relationships, and it's
Right.
connecting folks that should be connected, that can drive some productivity. And I do a lot of that. Like anybody who knows me knows that I'll create an introduction to somebody that is probably a good connection for them. So
Yeah.
I do a lot of connecting, and then having conversations with potential customers or customers about, you know, driving a sales motion, or creating some kind of product, is sort of my day to day.
Awesome. Awesome. When you're looking for partners within what you're doing, you obviously mentioned like the industry kind of side of it, but what criteria matters most to you?
Yeah, I really like that question because the I think, and this goes for different areas, not just in robotics, but I do some work, some nonprofit work. I'm on the board of a couple of nonprofits, including RoboGeorgia. But finding alignment, like, if one thing, if I don't say one word, it's alignment. That we should take away from this podcast is alignment means everything, and there's so many different meanings for alignment or where it shows up, and so.
Mm.
Um, when I think about when I think about alignment, it's really about to trying to match a partner's why with our why. Right? We may align on a particular technology or thing, or we're aligning on AI for whatever reason, or safety or whatever. But understanding their why around safety and matching that up with sort of our why allows for a lot richer conversations, and it allows you to dig into, not just being a transactional conversation, but you can sort
Yeah.
of dig into the roots of what safety means for them, right? And then you can have conversations about, okay, well, there's these things that are happening within safety that may interest you, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, in having a deeper conversation about what that means from a hardware perspective, or what that means from a platform perspective, versus just saying we have model X, model Y, and model Z, sort of take your pick, right? And so I
Yeah.
really like trying to find the alignment pieces to have richer conversations about the end, and not have a transactional conversation.
Yeah. I think it mirrors a lot of how I operate as well. I think that's the most valuable. way of positioning, for the long term. And then
Yeah.
also it's not just like say transaction. You don't want to be a commodity. You don't want it to just be like quick win and then forget about it, but longer term actual partnership, having someone engaged in what you guys are doing. Obviously they're buying products from you, but it's how you work, how you look at the big picture and the long
Yeah.
term. I think that's pretty crucial. Can you talk us through or walk us through any recent successful partnerships or deployments and maybe lessons, key lessons that you learned along the way?
Yeah. Yeah. And so this isn't my deployment, but we have and I, like I mentioned before, I'm building a partner program. It's sort of we're in the middle of sort of launching that partner program. So you'll hear more about that in the next couple of weeks. And
Nice.
then we have several partners that will announce as a part of that. But we've got several partners that we've been working with for quite some time, or the last couple of years. One being Renesys. Renesys is a silicon provider, and they provide several functional safety MCUs that we're using in our platforms to help create functionally safe platforms. So when we think about safety in robotics, it's about having a platform that has a low risk of failure, in generally a low risk of failure, and then having the sort of the components that allow that, building that into a larger system or robot or application that has a high level of safety.
Yeah.
So Renesys is again a silicon provider, CPU provider, that we have several platforms using Renesys silicon as the safety MCU, to then as robot builders are bringing safety into their platform, they can develop on Renesys. So we've had really good partnerships. I think we're going to do more. I won't talk about a couple of events coming up, but
Yeah.
we'll be digging more into that relationship, and as a safety solution provider, and as a platform provider, I think it's a really good partnership, because now we can go and have conversations with whether they're integrators or end customers who are building safety into their ecosystem. It's a good partnership to have to build those discussions around.
Yeah, it's a hugely important area now. And I think, you're seeing it more and more in the conferences or even standalone events
Yeah,
and conversations in general, especially, the whole humanoid hype and all of that stuff. Like that is a big area of it. Or even just as robotics are becoming more and more adopted in different size businesses, industries, and ones that maybe aren't used to traditionally having technology there,
yeah,
or their first time, right? That's a big, some of it is a fear factor, but then obviously some of it is like real. If you have these robots working around people, you want it to be safe for a
right.
multitude of reasons. Um, in your view, what are the biggest barriers to adoption for robotics in like mid-market or smaller enterprises?
Um, yeah, I think there are a couple of things that are barriers to adoption, and some of it is just because, like, small medium businesses haven't had access to robotics in many
Mm,
cases, and as robotics costs and the ease of development deployment comes down, as the cost comes down and the ease of deployment goes up, now it's a new item that small medium businesses can take advantage of. But it's something different. That in of itself is a barrier, right? That slows things. Just the inertia is a thing. And then right on top of that is, okay, what is the solution that we need to pick, right? And if it's a new thing, there may not be a lot of examples, in a particular business segment, right? A new small medium business segment that are examples of, hey, this worked amazingly, right? No problems. And so I think there's a little bit of hesitancy. I think it's new, and I think I was just having this discussion with a colleague about, like, information, right? When you look at some of the studies, some of the bigger studies that you might see from analysts, right? A lot of the data comes from the top 10% of manufacturing companies, right? And so that data is sort of skewed towards large manufacturers. Well, these large manufacturers deployed um, technology in this particular way, right? And so does that information 100% apply to small and medium businesses? I think I think that sometimes is a challenge. Like, okay, well, let's do the study on small and medium businesses implementing technology, so that small and medium businesses that want to implement technology now have that information. Don't just do it at the top 10%
Yeah,
of manufacturers. So I think it's skewed that way. But I think the more companies realize that, okay, that's one business implementing this in a large manufacturer or a large, supply chain interlogistics space is a different business than implementing it in a small and medium manufacturer. And they've got to sort of treat those as separate businesses. I think that's happening more often. Um,
agreed.
but yeah, I think that's a barrier. And I think folks are getting better at that. And I think especially as the U.S. is trying to bring back manufacturing here, right? Reshore, nearshore. I think that's a key thing, right? The small and medium businesses and manufacturers are the brunt of that workspace, right? And so that's going to have to happen in order for a lot of that work to transition back in the U.S.
Definitely. Yeah, I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but I was having that conversation about the logistics industry as well, because it's only really the biggest players that have incorporated
Yeah.
robotics or automation in any respect. But the majority of if you go by sheer number,
Mhm.
not as throughput, but the majority are the smaller logistics operations, right? So these smaller warehouses and delivery services, and they haven't even touched on this yet. So there's a
Right.
huge untapped area.
And I hope that, like we were talking about before in manufacturing, that it's not like, oh well, we can't refill any of these jobs and now all of
Yeah.
a sudden we have to automate, right? And
Yeah.
hopefully it's feathered in a little bit more than that. I think there are a lot of forces that are helping drive that, but
Yeah.
we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, what's your view on balancing customization versus scalability in deploying robotic solutions?
I was at an event earlier this year, and one of the leaders uh, mentioned something really interesting, and he talked about customization and versus scalability, or versus he didn't use scalability. I think it was some other outcome metric, and instead of customization, he preferred the concept of um, configuration, right? And so basically, instead of customization, which implies that you need to do something different or you're changing what you're doing, he liked configuration, meaning that you've sort of planned for this idea of building out a solution, but you're just configuring the platform to now support that solution, right? And so sort of thinking through the idea of what do you need to do to go from customization to configuration, and then how does that allow you to scale, because you're
Yeah.
not spending time rebuilding stuff or kind of tailoring this to a particular solution. You're customizing this for a particular solution, and doing less heavy lifting. So I really like that concept, and I think that is a way for folks to think about, don't reinvent the wheel for each customer. Figure out what the commonalities are and be able to configure for those different customers. And
Yeah.
instead of, I think that helps with scalability. It's also, comes back to the idea of the POC, right? The proof of concept. There's a lot of discussion around robotics companies not doing POCs, right? Because you get stuck in this cycle of doing POCs forever, and it doesn't allow you to scale. So if you can figure out, maybe it's a sale, and it's sort of maybe not mass, but it's sort of this idea of we're making revenue for this POC, and we're building this solution with the customer, and it's not the idea of a traditional POC where you're just trying to prove the concept. Um,
Yeah.
the last thing I'll say on that is, many times and this is maybe a through line through some of the other conversations. Um, Many times when you're deploying a robotic solution, you can prove that the solution works, the concept works, right? But the challenge is going from concept to meeting those KPIs, right?
Yeah.
What is the end customer's KPIs, and can your robotic solution, your automation solution, actually meet those KPIs? And so figuring out, to get from there to there is, if you think of scalability as an equation, that's the gap, right?
It's
Here's the
not,
X
yeah.
factor, right?
Yeah, because you hear people like, "Oh, it's easy to make something work in a lab, one
Right,
time out of five." But are you going to get to 99% uptime, which is what your customers are going to pay for? Like,
right.
that's the real
Today's
thing.
at a specific beat rate, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious. What you said there is super valuable, and I think getting stuck in that POC kind of death cycle maybe for some customers, because then for some companies, because then you can't either generate the revenue or raise capital again or whatever,
Yeah,
is a very good point, and a good cautionary tale. On the other side, to play devil's advocate a bit, I'm curious on your perspective. What about if you're building, it's probably more relevant for earlier stage companies, but if you're building a product for industries, obviously each customer might have slightly different needs. How do you think, or how would you approach it, like going into, hey, we're just going to do this for 5 customers, figure out the general use case across all of them, customize to each one, and then make, like you said, end up being configuration instead of customization moving forward? Or are you just going to choose one customer to be your pilot,
yeah,
do everything for them, and then go and sell to others in the industry?
yeah.
How would you think through that?
That's a, putting my my, which is sometimes bad. So I put my MBA perspective on, my MBA optics on, and one of the things that I really liked about the MBA, and that's kind of why I went back to get an MBA, was the strategy side. And
Yeah.
so with strategy and thinking through strategy, and thinking through robotics strategy, the idea that, you know um, specifying things that you're not going to do, right, is part of strategy. And so as a business, you're trying to start a business, you want to build a solution, it's a robotic solution. You look at the things that all of the workspace, the space that you could do things in, right, with this
Yeah.
particular solution. But should you do those things in this solution? And how, coming back to your question about scalability, how does that, prevent scalability if you're trying to, service a bunch of different use cases, right? So I think some of it, and I think it depends on, of course, the devil's in the details. It depends on specifics, but I think it's better in many cases to come up with a strategy that allows you to narrowly focus in on certain areas, and go after those areas, and don't try to, boil the ocean.
Everything
There's
to
all these,
everyone. Yeah.
right, and exactly, and I think, there's a, I think that's very attractive to be able to service all of these different things, and but it's also very challenging. And I think at the
Yeah.
early stages, being able to hit a fast ball, right, all of the time, I think is going to be beneficial than trying to, focus your training on being able to hit every ball all the time. I'm not a baseball guy, so I do, maybe
Neither am
maybe
I.
there's going to be somebody who's Milt. That's not how you train,
Yeah.
to
What you
hit baseball.
Um, cool. I'm curious. Let's shift gears now, because I'm. You've got a very unique lens about the industry at large, and like you said, you're involved in the ecosystem. You've got the startup side. You're working with big companies. What technological trends are you watching closely at the moment?
Yeah. There's some really good trends. I mean, if you think about this idea of, automation and robotics in general, there's several really interesting conversations that are happening. You can say interesting, or you can say they're sort of at odds with each other. But there's this idea of, um, single function robotics, or low function, number of function robotics, and general functionality robotics. So you can think of, industrial arms, cobots to some extent,
Yeah.
versus like humanoid robots, right? Or high degree of functionality kinds of robots. And then all the pieces that go along with it. So the AI layer and sort of the controls and all those things that happen. So I'm very interested in that conversation. And it's, to me, it's almost like the Mac versus PC conversations, sort of, right? So that's something that I'm following. That the whole idea around for humanoid robots, dexterous hands, dexterous manipulation, and sort of, there's been several recent articles about what humanoid robots need in order to kind of fulfill their, their space, um, fulfill their destiny. But one is dexterous hands, like being able to manipulate things like humans and feel like humans and have skin and all the different feedback and force feedback things around joints and surface area and things of that nature. That's all needed. The idea is that's all needed in order for humanoid robots to progress.
Yeah.
Um, and in sort of uh, the just across robotics, I think the idea around development and of course safety is a huge thing that I'm following, and all the little pieces that that where safety falls into the platform development, whether it's what's happening with AI being used in safety. What are the benefits in that space? So there are a bunch of things coming up. Reynolds and Moore is a leader in sort of AI and safety, and there's the IEC 22440 standard that's sort of in the works around safety, around AI and in safety and what that provides. So I'm following a bunch of those things. I've got this. I got to give a shout out to one of my co-collaborators, Aaron Prather, who was heading up this IEEE humanoid study. So I
I
got that.
saw that.
There's
Yeah.
95 pages of that summary or that the study group output on my desk. I was supposed to read it over the weekend. I didn't get to it, but I'm working on it. So I'm
Nice.
following that, and of course that's a lot in safety. And then there's this, there's several spaces in safety that I'm following. So it's all really interesting stuff, and yeah, it's good. It's good stuff.
Love that. How do you see robotics coexisting or even converging with other automation technologies? You guys touch some of it, right? IoT and there's the rest, digital twins, etc.
Yeah, I feel like it's an interesting, like, robotics is already a multidisciplinary problem, right, or solution, depending on how you're looking at it. And so, whether it's the mechatronic side, the kinematics, the software within the robot, within the creation of the robot, but then outside of the robot, like robotics tools, right? Like all the debug tools and stuff that you need to debug the whole automation ecosystem, from robot to communications to orchestrating multi-robot kind of end missions, endpoint to endpoint. So tools, things, the analytics and the simulation, all of that digital twin stuff. I look at it as all part of the ecosystem,
Yeah.
and there are companies that are focused on one part. They're doing digital twins, or they're doing communications, between the different platforms, right? Um, there's, I think all of these pieces to me are, it's all part of the whole, and all of these things are necessary. Like ROS, right? ROS, the robot operating system, and the developer ecosystem, right, is huge.
Yeah.
They're all pieces of this, this larger whole that I think all needed to be tended, right? It's all like the garden, cultivate your garden and then your plants will grow. And so I think it's all part of the ecosystem that needs to be, cultivated in order to grow these solutions, these outcomes that we're trying to drive using robotics and automations. I look at it as a, an ecosystem of all of these different things.
Awesome. And you obviously touched on some of this already, but what role do standards, excuse me, battling a cold,
Yeah.
what role do standards, regulations, certifications, etc., what do you think they play in accelerating or even hindering robotics adoption?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, if you think about innovation, if you just think sort of generically about innovation and think of, okay, well, what helps drive innovation? And this is maybe one perspective of it, but there are certain um, limiting factors or caveats that help drive innovation. Like if you have a set of Legos, right, and you only have 10 Legos, you've got to build something out of those 10 Legos, right? Are you going to build something different versus having 100 Legos or 1,000 Legos for to sort of create something with? Does that only having 10 Legos have to make you think more creatively about what you're going to build? So I think of sort of maybe abstractly think of safety standards as sort of not not bad or harmful, but limitations that are part of the ecosystem that prevent a particular thing. So in this case, safety,
Yeah.
you don't want to harm people, right? So you have to innovate within that space of how do I do this task without harming people? Now I've got to get creative about doing this particular thing or driving a solution that's different from the if I started off with the premise of, well, just build something, we don't care if you harm humans or not, right? And so does that drive innovation? I think that playing field is a little bit different and it's less innovative in sort of these restrictions tend to drive innovation and people thinking and trying to think, okay, how do I do this given having these restrictions? I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No,
It's
no,
kind
no,
of
no. It's true. I think it's needed. Some sort of framework, some sort of guidelines,
yeah,
definitely the safety element. And no, I once they're in place, you can move a lot quicker
yeah.
instead of the worry of going after this moonshot idea and then regulation coming in and just stopping you.
I think the challenge. I think the challenge is the okay. Getting from knowing we need certain regulations to establishing those regulations. Right.
Yeah,
There's a lot of time that happens between people having conversations about what the regulation should be and inputs from the different system. I think that's probably the area that I hear the most of. Like, hey guys, we need your feedback. Provide us the feedback because now we have to do something about this. And if you don't provide us feedback, we're just going to go and we're going to eventually have to create the regulation. And now,
yeah,
does that put the innovators that maybe didn't provide the feedback? Does that put them at a loss, right? And so I think
right.
the challenge is getting from again knowing that we need realistic regulations to actually publishing those regulations.
Yeah. If you had unlimited resources, what moonshot robotics project would you pursue?
I'm really interested in. I've always been interested in nano robotics, and so that would be someplace like I really want. I'm a sci-fi fan, a Star Trek guy, and all
Yeah.
this other stuff. I'm sure I've made references to at least something Star Wars and Jedi.
You
Yeah,
wanted to
so
be a Jedi, you said.
right, right. So that will probably come out as far as my background in sci-fi, but nano robotics all the way. I'd love to have. I recently was talking about a like a 3D printer. Like 3D printing technology is amazing to me, but what if you could print that on a nano scale? What if you could print build your robot from basically the molecule up, right? What would that look like if you could design that and create? I actually even, I think I sent a note out to Peter Diamandis about, the X Games, the X Prize, not X Games, but the X Prize.
Yeah.
Um, and like, we need a Star Trek replicator. Like, give somebody $10 million or whatever it is to start working on the replicator. I think that would be cool. That's my moonshot.
That, yeah, well, we might not be that far off. Maybe you need to start tinkering on that in the background.
Right.
Well, look, I'm conscious of time and we're almost at the end of it. But before you go, I do want to get a bit of your advice for engineers or professionals seeking to move into business development, strategy roles in robotics. Like, what would you share for people thinking about that path?
Specifically in business development and robotics, I think that it's a partnerships game. I think it's about building a network of people that are in that space or like-minded that you can learn from. I'm learning. I learn every day. Every time I go out to an event and meet with people, I'm constantly learning. I think that's a perspective that is super helpful to have. Is be in constant learning mode. There's so
Yeah.
much going on. Make good connections. There are a lot of people that are connected to many other domains. Connect with those folks because they can give you really good insight and sort of get you thinking outside of the box. So that would be my advice.
I love that. Is there anything that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Oh, so many things. So many things. So many things. I wish I would have started earlier, and I wish I
Okay.
would have been a little bolder in the things that I wanted to do. That would be, yeah, that's what I would have wanted to be a little more bold and a little more um, uh, faster to uh, faster to make decisions.
Do you think some of that comes with, because I'm similar, but then when I try and give myself some grace, I'm like, does some of that come with wisdom and conviction? Or
Absolutely.
because if you just go and do stuff like bold and go, you
Yeah.
can either rub people the wrong way or make a lot of bad mistakes early
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, it
So,
does. It's like they say there's a phrase or a saying, um, youth is wasted on the young, right? And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
yeah,
I think an old person's perspective. Like, geez, I wish I was younger and
yeah,
knew all the stuff that I know now. I would do
100%.
things totally differently or faster or whatnot. But yeah, I think those things come with wisdom and come with some of the bumps and bruises that we get as we grow in our ecosystems, right? And how we deal
Yeah,
with
for
people
sure.
and all these other things. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah. But to that point, if you knew what you knew now, going back, it's like just catapult. But anyways, let's excuse me again. But look, thank you so much for being on the show, Milt. I really
Greg, I
appreciate
appreciate it.
it. It's been a while coming. How
Yeah,
can our listeners learn more about you and NexCobot and follow along for everything you guys have going on
I'm
and
pretty active.
RoboGeorgia?
Absolutely. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn where I talk about all of these things. And yeah, I think that's probably the best place to engage. Of course, NexCobot's website is, there's constant information there. But I think a good place to engage is on LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well,
Thanks,
thank you so
Greg.
much. We'll link all of that in the show notes and I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.